Welcome to our webinar, Beat the Competition Every Time, presented by GrowthPlay, how to enable a winning company-wide sales strategy. Thank you for taking the time to join us for our conversation on gaining a competitive edge in the marketplace. My name is Rachel Clapp-Miller, and I'm the Director of Digital Engagement at GrowthPlay. We're a sales effectiveness consulting firm that, bottom line, helps organizations generate more revenue per rep. And we talk a lot about differentiation, so we're excited to share this topic with you today. Before we get started, just to let you know, we are going to respect your time. We won't run more than 55 minutes. There is a question pane at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We're encouraging questions. We want this to be interactive, and we will answer all of your questions. If we can't answer them in our time today, we'll have a direct follow-up with you after the webinar. You'll also be able to participate in several live polling questions. You'll be able to click your answers on the screen, so please be watching for that. And a recorded version of this webinar will be sent to all registrants within the next few days, so please watch your email for that. Joining me for today's discussion is Managing Director of Customer Success and Strategy, Tim Cato. Tim has more than 30 years of experience in sales effectiveness and management consulting. He's worked with some of the largest companies in the world, AT&T, FedEx, Microsoft, Walmart, consulting on both the buyer and seller side. His ability to help clients improve their ability to negotiate on value, articulate differentiation, has brought in record amounts of ROI for his engagements. I have seen it myself, and I'm excited to have him with us today. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Rachel. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here to talk to you today about one of my favorite topics, beating the competition every time.
Great. And before we get started, we'd love to hear your perspective on enabling your own sales team to effectively differentiate in the marketplace. You can tweet us at GrowthPlay using the hashtag #SalesGrowth. Again, we do have that question in the webinar, so please ask your questions there. Tim, I know that, as you mentioned, differentiation is a topic that you're really passionate about and something that you have worked with hundreds of sales leaders on. As a sales leader, as someone who is ultimately responsible for the number, you need to make sure that your sales reps and everyone who's engaging with your customers are crystal clear on what makes you different from the competition. Why should a customer choose you? And building clarity around that question can really drive results when it comes to closed-won deals. So as we get started, Tim, why do you think so many organizations struggle with losing to the competition and articulating differentiation?
Well, you know, Rachel, when you think about it, customers almost always have two underlying questions when they start considering buying from us. Can you provide what I need? And if so, why should I buy from you? Now, of course, the second question deals specifically with differentiation. In my experience, I found that there are three reasons why sales organizations struggle with differentiation. The first one is they have a tendency to be internally focused. And by that, what I mean is they try to differentiate on things that matter to them, but don't necessarily matter as much to the customers. Secondly, they over-rely on unique features and functions. Now, trust me, this is great when you have them, but they're short-lived. Once those features and functions are no longer unique, sellers don't know how to handle that why you question. It's as if they've become chemically dependent on their unique differentiation. And then lastly, this third reason why organizations struggle is they fail to establish customer relevancy for their differentiators for each specific customer. See, what sellers often forget is customers are not asking, why should anyone buy from you? They're asking, why should I buy from you? Now, differentiation without first establishing relevancy for that differentiator with this specific customer makes it really hard for the customers to see the value that that differentiator represents to them. So here's the thing. Enabling your sales organization to differentiate on value that's specific and relevant for each customer, that's a critical component of beating the competition every time and hitting your numbers quarter after quarter. Now, we believe this is a root cause of many downstream sales challenges. What I'd like to do now, though, is take a quick poll, the first of our polls. Here's our question. Where do your reps struggle most often in the sales process? Do they struggle differentiating with the competition? connecting features with business value? Do they struggle negotiating on price? Do they struggle discovering customers' needs that happen to align with your solution? Or, of course, the all-time favorite, all the above?
We see these challenges a lot with companies out there, Tim, and I know you've seen them a lot as well.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll be seeing the results here in a second. But, you know, I think what I'm going to predict what we're going to find here, Rachel, and that is that a lot of these challenges can be linked back to that root cause of differentiation.
Yep.
There, look at that across the board. Connecting features with business value is a challenge. Followed closely by all of the above, or tied with all of the above. Not a surprise, right? But again, think about differentiation as a root cause that could be reflected in these numbers. How can it be, if we can't differentiate, how does it help us position against our competition? If we can't differentiate, it's really difficult to focus on the value that our solutions provide. Heck, if we can't differentiate, what's the likelihood we're going to be able to negotiate on the value we bring versus the price we charge? And, you know, one of the biggest things that our inability to differentiate causes is it makes it really tough to uncover additional solutions that we can, our additional problems our solutions could potentially help with. So again, maybe not a surprise, but also indicating how significant this idea of negotiation is. So let's turn back to our conversation here and talk about how do we establish our differentiation and value to each specific customer. Well, here's my first hint to you. It's not with the logo slide. You guys know that slide. We all have it in our deck, right? It's, you know, how many of us have that slide in our presentation that shows all those great logos we work with? Now, that's supposed to be a symbol of how great we would be to work with for the prospect customer we're talking to. You know, and we should be proud of those logos, but we have to remember something, that those logos on their own have no specific meaning to the customer you're talking to now. You know, that customer, we all have them, that customer that says that and strongly believe that their business and challenges are very different than any other customer we might have. You know, and they're telling us the truth when that happens. Now, we have to remember, those customers don't care as much about all those logos we work with as much as they care about, can we do anything to help them increase their revenue? What can we do to help them decrease their costs? Is there anything about the solutions we provide that help them mitigate risk? So as leaders of your organizations or leading sales professionals, what do we need to do to make sure every rep on our team knows how to articulate our differentiation in a way that has meaning to each specific customer? And if you're taking notes, please write down that is really a key, showing our differentiation to each specific customer. Now, it starts by driving consistency across our organization on how we answer these essential questions. How does your sales team influence the customer's view of their problem? How do you solve those problems differently than your competitor? How do you get credit for that difference throughout the sales process? That's a good question. And where's your proof? And by that I mean proof that your difference is exactly what you say that it is. Now, the answers to these questions are critical. If what makes you different doesn't matter to the customer, then there's no competitive advantage, and you're likely in the HOV lane to a price-focused bake-off. Now, finally, if you and your team can't clearly and consistently answer these questions, how can you expect your customer to truly understand what makes you different? So, why is differentiation more critical today than really ever before? I think it has a lot to do with today's business-to-business buyer. We refer to that person as the digital buyer. The person that has more information at their fingertips, information that can both inform and confuse, which is why our ability to differentiate is so critical today. Now let's look at what we know about this digital buyer. Okay? First of all, remember the digital buyer It's someone that leverages information technology and social technology to inform their view of their needs, their optimal solution, even their purchase decisions. And I guess when you look at it that way, in other words, today everyone's a digital buyer, both in the business-to-consumer markets as well as business-to-business markets. I found this interesting when I first saw it. These are research findings from Serious Decisions that were just taken last year, and I think it reveals, this slide and the next one, reveal a common misperception about how digital buyers buy. Because, you know, we all know about it. Here's what we think they do. We think that digital buyer goes out and conducts their web research, and that influences, what does it say on the slide? 50% of their buying journey is done away from us. So they conduct their research, then they contact us, then they buy, right? Well, that's a huge misperception. And if we think this today, we're very vulnerable to competitors that figured out what's really going on. Look at this from the rest of this research. Up to 65% of opportunities we have to position our differentiation occurs digitally, with no human involvement, not even sellers. Plus, it takes place at multiple times across the customer's journey, not just up front. Now, anyone on the phone that relies on renewals knows that fact all too well. So here's the thing. Overcoming the struggle to differentiate from the competition, as we saw in the poll survey that you guys just took, you know, differentiating from the competition involves a lot more than just making sure your reps can articulate your difference early in their sales cycle, you know, right after the customer's done their online research. See, differentiation is established at many points along the customer's journey. And wow, if this slide is accurate, and I don't know about you, but it looks like the business I run, a good bit of our differentiation occurs after the customer buys. You know, when they're expecting to get the value that we've been promising them all along, when we're delivering our solutions to them, we're developing those ongoing relationships that in many ways are going to be enhanced by our ability to actually prove our differentiation is providing value to them. We're trying to retain the customers. We're trying to grow that business by opportunity number 2, 3, 15, whatever. So here's the point we got to make sure. We have to align all of our messaging and customer interactions so that our differentiators can be seen by each customer in a way that they see as really relevant and meaningful to them. And now here comes the complication. And many times along the customer's journey with us, and guess what? To make it a little harder, we often have to do it with multiple people that might see different aspects of what we bring from a differentiation standpoint in different ways. So, you know, if we don't master that kind of complex challenge, then our differentiation means nothing to them. Now, if you haven't figured it out already, this is not a trivial thing. And it's also not just a sales thing. Now, our sellers still play a key role in achieving differentiation, but what I'd like to do right now is first look at what your sellers can do to help establish differentiation, and then we'll look at how you can extend that capability across your entire organization. Now, look at this research that was published in Harvard Business Review a couple years ago. I think it's still relevant. It was research done with hundreds of B2B salespeople that talked about the top reasons why they lose. No decisions, stalled sales cycles, they can't penetrate those new accounts, they're seen as offering a commodity solution that everybody else has, and they lose deals because they lose on price as opposed to their ability to leverage the value they bring. Now, one of the underlying challenges that's common across all these reasons is the inability to help customers see what makes you different from the competition, especially when the competition is do nothing or keep things the way they are now, frequently called business as usual. And I know a lot of us on the phone, on the web webinar today, compete against those guys every single day. Now, to overcome these challenges and win every time, we think sales teams have to perform 3 critical skills. So what are those 3 critical skills? You might look at them and say, well, those are kind of obvious. Uncover customer needs, articulate value and differentiation, and negotiate value. Let me break these down a little bit. The first one on the left, uncovering customer needs. Now, why is this so significant as it relates to establishing our differentiation? This is the thing that creates the relevancy for our differentiators. As I said before, if the differentiator doesn't seem like it's relevant to the customer situation, it means nothing to them. No matter how proud we are of it or how long we invested to get it, if it means nothing to them, it means nothing. Now, the trick on the box on the left is one that we find a lot of sellers miss. Most selling organizations understand they have to uncover their customers' needs. What they miss along the way, though, is the reality that that's only part of the battle. The real challenge here is how do I get the customer to uncover their needs, to understand things they might not have understood from their web research, to understand some things they might not have reached their own conclusions on. So our job is to lead that discovery, which most of us do, not just to understand what's going on with the customer and catch up to what they're thinking about. We're trying to help them discover new insights to what it is that they need, what their requirements are. Now, this is an often overlooked point, but it's a critical one. We often say at Growth Play, customers rarely argue with their own conclusions. So if we can be involved in helping them uncover their needs in a way that allows them to gain insights and hopefully new insights on things they're going to have to address their challenges, and oh, by the way, we're the ones that happen to be doing that, they reach their conclusions, their own conclusions, on a broader set of needs that they have, which then, frankly, influenced by us, allows us to go to the second step. Articulate value and differentiation, tied, hard-coded back to the customer's understanding of their own needs. Now, this is the main point. So when we talk about differentiation, we have a tendency to think what we have to do is double down on everyone in the organization's ability to describe those differentiators. And that's very important. But don't lose sight of the fact that we have to create relevancy for those differentiators as well. And that's what's covered in the box on the left, uncovering needs. Establish what the requirements are, that establishes the relevancy, then come in and talk about our value and our differentiation linked specifically to their world. And guess what? If we have some differentiators that don't connect to the customer's world, in other words, they're not relevant to them, as much as we want to talk about them, we need to not talk about those differentiators unless the customer first understands the need that we could connect our differentiator to. So what's the point here? Make sure everyone has the ability to talk about your differentiation, but also make sure that they only do it after having first focused on establishing what in the customer situation would make that differentiator relevant. Now, the box out on the right, I hope we can all agree that if you do the two things, the 2 critical skills on the left, you do those really well, it makes it a lot easier to be able to negotiate on value, which of course is different than negotiating on price. That's really a key point for us to make. It's very difficult to negotiate on value if you reverse engineer, if you're not able to establish that compelling value bring that nobody else has, reverse engineer, back to what the customers reach their own conclusions on is highly relevant to them. Now, let's shift gears a little bit. That's what your sales team needs to do and you sales professionals need to do. But let's now go back and talk about how we can expand that ability to differentiate across your entire organizations. All right, well, first what we have to do is realize and accept that today, articulating our differentiation needs to be an organizational capability, not just the sales capability. Right? Think about that. An organizational capability, not just the sales capability. So, the question that's on the screen right now, why it needs to be an organizational capability, I'd like to answer that question by first asking you a question. So let's take another poll. What percentage of deals is your organization losing to the competition, no decision, or do it internally? Please select one of those percentages on the screen. And to me, this is an interesting question because what it assumes is we've already got to the point where we're seriously being considered by the customer, and they've already apparently answered the first question, can you provide what I need? Now, when we're looking at losing the competition, no decision, or internal solution, that's really when they're focused on answering question number 2, why you? So again, hopefully you are finding a chance to go to the poll. We'll be watching those numbers as these come up.
Tim, I think we always have a saying that these people are always in the room. The competitor's always in the room, whether you know they're there or not, because you can always compete against that no decision or that internal solution.
There you go. The competitor that's always in the room. Love that. So when you look at our results here, if I did an average, I would say that most of you said about 50% of the time when you lose, it's to the competition, no decision, or losing to someone internally, which means the customer is probably going to do something. Here's the thing I love about do nothing. We have a tendency to believe the customer's doing nothing. What's the reality with that? The reality is, no, that means they're doing something else, right? The customer has chosen to funnel that budget, funnel that activity, funnel their resources to some other initiative that they believe will give them more return than the one we were talking with them about. Doing it internally, another challenge we'll talk about in a little bit, but here's what it says. We're not losing at the end because we failed to help the customer see some kind of a need. It feels like the customer understands the need, but we're maybe losing to these other decisions. So let's go back and talk a little bit more about organizationally what we can give our customers and our sellers to help give them that required differentiation all the way throughout the process. Well, we think that at the organizational level, we need to give our reps this information so that they can customize their positioning to their specific customer. And we also need to weave it in wherever possible across all those digital buyer touch points I referenced a while ago as they complete their journey with us. So, here are the 2 questions we always have to keep in mind when we feel like it's time for us to start talking about what makes us different. So what and says who? Let's first talk about the so what. This is a question that almost every customer should have on their mind when a seller starts talking about how great they are. We've got a couple customers that compete in highly competitive marketplaces, and they say when everyone goes in and gives their pitch, they all have their number 1 slide. And I ask them, what's the number 1 slide? And they say, it's the one that everyone has in their deck that says, we're number 1 at this, we're number 1 at that, we're number 1 at the following. When I look at those number 1 slides, and I want you to think about it, how many of those are in there? And before we introduce them, we already know the answer to this question, so what? Remember, if you were practicing those 3 critical skills and helping the customer understand their needs and their requirements, by the time we start introducing our differentiation, we should have a clear understanding of what it is about our differentiator that we're introducing that represents significant value to this customer, value that can actually be measured. So here's a little side note to you, sellers and sales leaders that are out there. If you feel the urge to talk about something about you that you're really proud of and you think differentiates you from the competition, the first question you have to ask yourself from the customer's perspective, so what? Why would this differentiator matter to me? And this is not the time to have to explain it. You should have already laid that foundation down, and now you're just connecting your so what to it. Now the second question, Says who? Well, guess what? A lot of times the decisions customers make, well, they always have an impact on our ability to make a sale. But think about it this way. For the customer, they have a huge impact on their ability to address their challenges at the business level, to maybe help them differentiate from their competition, to address a major challenge they're having in their marketplace. And at the personal level, their reputation, their credibility, heck, in some cases, even their jobs are on the line. So do you think when all those sellers are out there telling them all the wonderful things they do, beyond making sure those things actually apply to their situation via the first question, so what? You know what? If I'm a customer, I want to know, says who? Besides you, seller, who says you can actually do what you say you can do? Because I'm getting ready to make a significant investment right here. Not only money and effort, but on behalf of our organization to address a challenge we have. Oh, by the way, part of that significant investment is my career. So I want to make sure you can actually do what you say you can do. Now, this is really an important point, the defensibility of your proof points. And one of the things we frequently find when we work with organizations and study sales campaigns, selling organizations have a tendency to throw out proof points on their differentiators that feel a little bit more like urban legend. We work with many, many big customers like you. They have many, many problems similar to you. And we've produced many, many results. And then the customer, trying to answer this question, says who? Says, well, can you give me an example? And sellers have a tendency to stall for a minute because, unfortunately, they weren't prepared for that question. Don't know how, but they weren't. And they say, have you been to our website? We've got a lot of customers listed there. Yes, I have, but I didn't see one that sounded like me. Well, listen, I might have to get back to you on which specific customer had problems like yours, what the solutions were we installed there, and what results were. I'm going to get back to you. Now imagine at that moment, what's the confidence you're installing in that customer that your differentiators are anything other than, things in a marketing concept that got thrown out in a brochure or training. We need to be very specific, knowing in advance, based on the discovery we've conducted and the sales campaign we've conducted, we need to know the specific value that we can articulate when we introduce our differentiator that's relevant and meaningful to the customer. And when we do it, we have to have proof that backs up we can do what we say we can do, and we've done it before. Now, this is another thing. Yes, please go ahead, Rachel.
I'm sorry. We have a question, and I think it relates to what you're saying now. We're talking a lot about customer value and providing proof. So this question has come in about, what if you sell a product that's more of a commodity and you're always competing on price? How do you as a sales leader think about that differentiation differently so it goes beyond price, maybe leveraging what you're saying right now?
Yeah, great question, Rachel. So what says who? Let's think about commodities. By definition, what's a commodity? It's something that everybody has the exact same thing, and that the only difference is price. Well, this is going to dovetail not only to my experience, Rachel, but also my very strong belief. Even in the commodity marketplace, there's no such thing as a commodity. I'll give you an example of that. Once did some work with a selling organization that shipped commodities to a rather large food manufacturer that all of us know and probably consume many of their products. And the buyer for that organization, for the food manufacturer, got a great deal on a train load of oats. A commodity, right? The only difference is price. And that oats, they needed to be pulled right into a manufacturing facility. And all those oats were consumed, and the buyer felt really good about they got a great deal on the oats. There was only one problem. Those oats were shipped in contaminated containers. And that organization, food manufacturing, had the one and only recall in the history of their company on one of their largest brands. It created huge brand damage. And I can assure you because I talked to the person that ran that purchasing organization for that large organization, and you know what he told me about that? There's no such thing as a commodity. Quality matters. Timing matters. Reliability matters. Our service matters. Whatever it is. So if you find yourself in a price-only conversation, to me, that's exactly why we need to expand the customer's understanding of their own situation. Now, as you can imagine, that selling organization that was next in to sell a commodity to that food manufacturer, the seller actually asked a great question. What beyond price is also going to be critical for you in making your decision? And guess what they found out? Timing of the shipments into our facilities, the reliability of those shipments, and big surprise, quality of the product when it gets here. And in fact, what that organization was able to do was they were able to differentiate on their cargo container inspection process. And it's something that they always felt was a really big differentiator, but buyers that didn't have a context for that said, that sounds like a service I don't need. Well, guess what? After that experience, they realized they did. So my long-winded answer there is, the first challenge is you got to get away from believing you're selling something that's a price-only kind of situation, and you got to put yourself in the customer's shoes and say, what else is going on that would matter to them, their so what, that I can connect our differentiation to, and then be able to prove that we could do it as well. That's a great question. I'm glad somebody brought that up. So with that in mind, let's expand on how we can take our ability to differentiate and really play it across our entire organization. Well, part of that is we need to understand there's actually 3 different types of differentiators: holistic differentiators, unique differentiators, and comparative differentiators. To really effectively establish your differentiation, you need to understand these differences. So let me break down each one of these in a little bit more detail. A holistic differentiator. Well, what is that? Well, it's a differentiator that speaks to some kind of attributes or characteristics or experience that your organization has that you believe the customer ought to consider. Some of my favorites here are number of years we've been in business, the number of years of experience people on our team have, our culture is one that people really care about, or, one of my all-time favorites, the map, the slide that shows the map that has the little dots on all of our different locations that shows we're worldwide. Again, these are all things we need to be proud of, but at the end of the day, we've got to ask ourselves, why would these matter to the customer? And here's the thing about a holistic differentiator that we have to remember, the key takeaway. They really don't have meaning to the customer unless the customer's maybe had an experience. For example, number of years we've been in the business, our financial backing, those might be things that we're really proud of that wouldn't matter to a customer unless maybe in the past they've invested in some technology with a up-and-coming organization that didn't have financial fortitude, didn't have longevity, and eventually went away. And all that money invested in their technology had to basically be shelved, and they had to invest more money in new technology. Here's the thing to remember about a holistic differentiator. On their own, they're likely not enough to skew the decision our way. However, if the customer's already leaning our way, these are the things that make them feel like there's less risk in going with us. Now, what's the differentiator we all want to have? A unique differentiator. You know what that one is? We have it, it matters to the customer, and we're the only ones that have it. Man, when you have those, you ought to be selling like crazy, especially if that thing that you have that matters to them and you're the only one that has it is one of their top priorities. You should be in the lead position, and it's the one we all want to be in. But what's the caveat that goes along with unique differentiators? Here's what I believe. If you've got them now, you better use them now, because in today's world, you're eventually going to lose them. Somebody else is going to innovate. Somebody else is going to have it too. And we have to understand they're very, very powerful, but they only if they matter to the customer and they matter now. Unique differentiators. Many of the organizations we work with believe that they've got a lot more unique differentiators than they really have, and they only have to talk to their sellers to find out, no, this boutique firm over here also has it. This organization that's coming in from Asia also has that. So we've got to help people understand, if you've got a unique differentiator, all the more reason to expand the customer's view of what their needs really are, so that we can find a home for our unique differentiator tied to something they believe really matters to them. Problem is, we don't have as many of these as we think, and we don't have them for very long. So what does that lead me to? Comparative differentiators. What are these? Differentiators is something that we have, and honestly, others have it. But there's something about our version of it that by comparison is better than the others. Now, this is the key thing, and I want you to look at that key takeaway on the screen. This is where we believe most competitions are won and lost, based on comparative differentiation. Does it make you mad when you know you have capabilities that your competitors don't, like an award-winning service organization that comes in, your consultants, they do a great job, your customers love them, and they're always there, they go the extra mile, and one of your competitors comes in and tells the customer, well, we have a service organization too. And the customer says, you have service, they have service, your price is too high, their price is lower, therefore I go with them. See what I say when that happens? Not shame on the customer, shame on us. We didn't educate the customer on what are the differences of our version, in this case, of service versus somebody else. You know, when you have unique differentiation, all you have to do is show them, and they can see that you have it, and nobody else does. When you have comparative differentiation, there's an extra burden here. We have to have the ability to really quickly be able to help the customer understand how to discriminate between our version of what that differentiator is and everyone else that says they can do it. See, here's the point. Out there in the marketplace, I don't know if you guys have noticed it, but anyone can say anything. We want to make sure that the customer understands and has that discriminating eye of what is it about yours that actually makes yours better, and why would that matter to me? And oh, by the way, can you prove it? So what says who? Now, here's the thing. No matter what type of differentiation you're dealing with, you have to ensure that you've got these three things in place to tie your differentiation throughout the sales process. So this is the first of a couple points I want to make here on how we weave differentiation in throughout all those various touch points we're going to have with the customer. The first one I've already spent a lot of time talking about. Can your differentiators, exposed in the right way early in the conversation with the customer, actually help influence the customer's view of their requirements? You know, remember early on, when a customer realizes they have a need, one of the first things they want to do is understand the need and then understand what's required to solve that need or problem. This is a time when our ability to talk about our differentiation, or at least ask really insight-provoking questions, can help the customer answer that question. What's required to solve the problem? Now, I'm not necessarily talking about my award-winning service here. I'm asking the customer questions. Hey, when have you installed the technology only to find that once it was installed, you had challenges with people learning how to use it. You had challenges with integration. You had downstream challenges you didn't even anticipate, where having some kind of ongoing support was important. Oh, yeah, I need that. Then is that one of your requirements? Absolutely. Now, I know in the back of my mind, I've got award-winning service that will fit perfectly into that requirement. But I'm kind of setting up the conversation up front. The second thing to integrate our differentiation into the sales process is when it is time to talk about our solution and our differentiation, we got to hard code it, link it right back to those requirements the customer reached their own conclusion on that they need to have. And then finally, if we do that and offer proof, here's the beautiful thing about that. We force the competitors to have to offer proof as well. So if you've got competition that says they can do things they can't really do, no better way to expose that than influence the customer's requirements, tie your value to those requirements clearly and strongly, and then provide proof that forces the competition to respond in kind. Now, differentiation plays out throughout the entire sales process. It starts at the beginning, from the very beginning. And oh, by the way, on this screen, you might be surprised, yes, customers have their own buying process too, just like we have our selling process. But what ends up happening is from the very beginning, when the customers are focusing on their needs, whether that's in a live interaction with us or a digital interaction, they're trying to figure out their needs. Then our ability to differentiate plays out over the rest of the sales conversation with the customer or buying conversation when they're trying to figure out not only can you provide what I need when they're qualifying us, but why should I buy from you when they're trying to get to the end to see highly differentiated solutions. Now, we might think this is our sales process. It starts with understanding the customer's needs and then proving we have a highly differentiated solution. Believe it or not, this is exactly the way customers want to buy. They want to understand their needs. They want to know who's in the best position to help them with that. And at the end, they want to be able to choose from highly differentiated solutions. Why? Because they need to justify that decision not only to themselves, but likely to somebody else. So hopefully you got that. I've delivered that message strong. But let's talk about how do we evolve this over what it said in that box, the customer's engagement process, right? Now, this view of how all us digital buyers provide opportunities for selling organizations to differentiate to us across our journey, this is a powerful insight here. See, it's one thing to enable our sales team to articulate differentiation and value. It's another thing to enable that across our entire organization so that across the entire customer journey, they see that differentiation called out. We call that the customer engagement process. So if you're having challenges, establishing your differentiation, realize, as I said before, it's not just a sales mandate. It is an organizational mandate and capability, enabling our sellers to manage differentiation in their sales cycle, then ensuring we communicate that differentiation across the entire customer engagement process. It really helps us compete against anyone, but it also helps us compete against these two cats. We talked about them before. Do nothing and do it internally, right? To beat these guys, we have to really focus on differentiation. Differentiation comes into play when we're competing against do nothing, which means we're trying to use our differentiation to differentiate the size of the pain or problem the customer has, or differentiating against doing it internally, which is all about the outcome. How can we help them get to the outcome better than anyone else? So when you look at it, that is really the big part of focusing on establishing our differentiation, Rachel.
Yeah, and really when we think about that bottom line, we're really looking to establish a context for differentiation with the buyer. And when our sales organizations are really able to drive that differentiation consistently, it can really make a bottom line impact. Well, Tim, I want to go ahead and get to some questions. I know a lot of people have been sending in questions, and as a reminder, you can ask your questions in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Go ahead and submit them. If we run out of time, we'll follow up with you directly. This session is being recorded, so we will be sending out the recording to everybody who's registered, so you can share it. So first question, Tim, I think this one is a good one. We've talked a lot about it, differentiation today, but how do we know that we have the right differentiation? How do you know that you're truly competitive with the differentiation that you have defined? How do you know that that matters?
Well, if you tie back to what I said, Rachel, I believe this is where the customers have the one and only vote. It's important for us to understand what we think our differentiators are, but remember, they only matter if they're relevant and specific to a customer. So how do I know I have the right differentiators for this moment? Part of it is based on what we uncover with the customer. Now, there are great product organizations, marketing organizations, and in most of your companies, they spend a pretty good amount of time looking at the competitive landscape and understanding what's going on with your customers, and they create the pool of differentiators that you have. But it's our job as the selling organization to right-size that pool of differentiators specific to the needs that the customer has. So the answer is, I think the way that you know you've got the right ones is completely tied to the discovery that you've conducted with the customer and your ability in advance to answer the so what, says who questions.
Great. This one sort of ties into that, and I know we might have some participants who are thinking the same thing. We have 10 plus companies in our space. Our products tend to be very similar. So how do we apply what you've talked about today in our market?
Yeah, another great question, Rachel. And here's the thing I want people to keep in mind. Let's all accept the fact that we can differentiate as much by the way that we interact with our customers as we do based on what we sell them or what the services we provide. So see, there's a big part of differentiation that comes into play there. But I would say the first challenge here is if we can't figure it out in our own mind, it's going to be really difficult for the customers. So here's again where I would put myself in the customer's shoes. Think about what's going on in their world. Help them understand the moments of pain or challenge they're living with. Help them break it down. Where are you at now, and what's the problem that's creating for you? Where do you want to be, and what good things would happen if you could get there? And then double on down on what customer are you going to have to put in place to get from where you're at to where you want to be. And I think if you focus on that, you can come up with a list of requirements that then will allow you many, many opportunities to be able to differentiate along some of those requirements the customer has. Because if you're the one driving that conversation, you control the customer's thinking about their requirements, you've got an opportunity to make the things that your differentiators align with really different. And your competitors, even though they might have similar things, don't have that chance. And then you got to make sure you do your your hard work to help customers understand why your comparative differentiators are in fact better than someone else's.
Right. I want to draw everybody's attention to the poll that just popped up. How can we help you meet your goals? If GrowthPlay can help you better drive consistency with how your reps are articulating differentiation and aligning with how your buyers buy, please go ahead and select all that apply on the screen. Go ahead and throw another question out, Tim. I know that we have both heard this one often. I feel like I've taught these best practices to my team. However, it seems that they're always defaulting to negotiating on price. How do I break that cycle?
Yeah, well, there's as simple as that question sounds and as prevalent as that challenge is in the marketplace, it actually is fairly complex and can be addressed at many angles. Part of it is the customers don't realize or don't know or don't believe there is any difference between the various folks that they're talking to. So that's one part of the problem. Of course, the second part of the problem there is if I've taught all these principles and my people aren't doing that, maybe I have an execution problem. And the third thing, let's not forget our old friends in procurement, right? Now, I work with those folks, and I believe when they show up the best they can be, they help customers make their own organization ensure that they don't buy a mistake. And what I've always taught sellers is, listen, hope is not a strategy here. We need to very purposefully and mechanically design our ability to establish our differentiation from very early in the conversation by many of the best practices we've talked about right here. And I think it's incumbent on sales managers or the folks that are closest to seeing what goes on in those conversations that can adjust those conversations keep the discussion with the customer focused on what they need to have in place to be able to address their problems. And then by the time we get to procurement, that, might be some people that want to make an easy decision. They all have their spreadsheets. They want to get it down to an easy decision. Is it who has the better price? The reality is the world doesn't work that way. And what we have to always remember is they have an internal customer, right? They are charged with not buying a mistake for the customer. So it's our job early on with the business contacts we're dealing with, throughout the conversation with the technical people that are looking at our solutions, maybe the ones that will use it, and then all the way through to procurement, establish the requirements they have. And double down on the requirements is a way to protect your differentiation at the end. Now, I will tell you, it's procurement's job to be able to say you guys are all the same and it's all about price. But imagine getting to that conversation knowing that upstream you have proven, you have established, you got a great track record that there in fact are differences, and you can look that procurement person in the eye and say, for what we bring, we believe this is a extremely competitive and good price for you. And anyone that doesn't have the ability to meet all your requirements probably has to give you a lower price to compensate for that. But the thing we got to count on is that buyer sitting there, no matter what they tell us and the look on their face, they've got an internal customer they got to make sure they get the job done for. So it's our job then and way before then to prove to them it isn't only about price.
Right. You mentioned sales managers a little bit ago, and I think that's a good time to ask this question. That you really want to make it easy for the reps to articulate differentiation, making sure it's having contact to the buyer, making sure you're listening to the buyer. So what sort of tools make it easy to drive that consistency with managers and the reps?
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you on this one, Rachel, because they're the oldest tools in the book. Here's the first one. Everybody get ready to write it down. The first tool, pre-call planning. Thinking it through ahead of time, especially if you've got some newer folks that are struggling with differentiation. Hey, sales managers, how about you actually plan out those important calls they're going to do early and see what's going on where your knowledge of some of our differentiation might come into play, and not leave your reps, basically just, exploding with a bunch of differentiators on the customer. Help your new reps in pre-call planning ask the kind of questions that will draw insight from the answers that the customer gives that will help them figure out their own requirements. Second tool, Rachel, you're really going to be upset by this one, role playing. Hey, sales managers, once you map out the call, why not practice it with your sellers? Everybody that calls themselves a professional in the world practices except salespeople. We have a tendency to practice with live ammunition right in front of a customer. I know many of you do role play. It's a critical tool to help ask the kind of questions that drive the conclusions that allow us to connect our differentiation in a very relevant, meaningful way. And the last tool, Rachel, again, I hate to disappoint, but it's a call debrief. Even if you are in the call with your seller, not just debrief the events, but debrief opportunities taken advantage of or opportunities missed to ask a question that can eventually allow us to position our differentiation. Now, there are many other things, but pre-call planning with great discovery questions, role-playing to practice, and post-call debriefs to make sure that people understand, basically break down the game film of their call. These are some of the best tools available to managers to actually help them improve their team's ability to position their differentiation.
Great words of wisdom, Tim. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the webinar. Tim, thank you for your time today. As a reminder, we're going to be sending out the recording after this webinar, so please be on the lookout in your email inboxes for that. Follow us on Twitter. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. Thanks again for joining. Have a great day.